Last but not least, in the first introductory session, we have Regan.
Regan Smyth.
Regan
Both
Smyth.
my names are not pronounceable.
Regan Smyth. I looped this in over my head so many times. Regan Smyth. Here you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and you'll be the last one really presenting on that AI aspect of the biodiversity and nature challenges. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. So NatureServe is a biodiversity informatics network with a focus in North America and global reach. And what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today is what Tanya just spoke about as biodiversity's data problem and some potential we have to solve that. Recently, NatureServe released this report. I've got some extra copies if people are interested, that really emphasizes some of the things you've already seen in the last presentations. In the United States, 34% of plants, 40% of animals are at risk of extinction. 41% of ecosystems are at risk of collapse. And those trends hold globally. If you look at species that have been assessed under the red list, 28% of species have been listed as threatened and endangered. That rate of extinction has been skyrocketing since 1900. And similarly with ecosystems, we see these huge declines in ecological integrity. This warrants action. The World Economic Forum identifies biodiversity loss right up there with climate action failure as one of the greatest global risks, high on both the impact and the likelihood scale. This matters, not just because pandas are cute and fuzzy or lions inspire good Disney movies, but because species and ecosystems are what house us and feed us and clothe us, provide innovations for medical advances, and buffer us against climate disaster. The good news is that the world is really starting to pay attention, right? We have new commitments coming out of COP15 in Montreal for governments to track biodiversity loss and stem that loss. We have new commitments from corporations to track biodiversity impacts and work towards a nature-positive future. But the bad news is that the data we have today is absolutely insufficient to meet those commitments. This quote from the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Forum is pretty telling. 90% of survey respondents reported that they lacked capacity for target tracking and reporting towards biodiversity targets. Why is this? You just heard some of the reasons. The data we have is geographically biased. The data we have is taxonomically biased. We can tell you all about those pandas, but comparatively little about the mussels that filter Earth's freshwater or the flower flies that pollinate Earth's plants. The data we have is often at spatial scales that aren't well matched to conservation decisions being made on the ground. And much of what we have is static in a time of rapid change. And even more than those data deficiencies, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the information out there is often both inaccessible and indecipherable to the people who are trying to use it on the ground to make decisions. There's numerous frameworks that have been developed to help us think about the types of data we need. This is one, but I only have 10 minutes, and so I'm going to keep it pretty simple. At NatureServe, we use these 3 questions to guide our work. We talk about what's out there, cataloging the species and ecosystems so we know what to measure and protect. This seems really, really simple, but it absolutely is not. Where is it? Getting that fine scale information that can direct action. And how's it doing? What's at risk? What are the threats? Where are those threats greatest? Today, whoops. All right, animations aren't working. Today, we often add a 4th question. We talk about what's changing as well. Given the rapid rates of loss, we need to be able to track trends, and we also need to be able to predict future scenarios. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River lit on fire. This sparked the environmental movement in the US, led to passage of the Endangered Species Act, and formation of NatureServe's network of biodiversity information centers. Since that time, our network has been working together and building systems and standards to allow information to flow together across jurisdictions. We've been building applications to analyze that information and turn it into information products that can be used by decision makers. This is, lost my train of thought. In some ways we've talked about ourselves as the tech firm for nature. But if I'm to be totally frank, the information we have today is really insufficient for what's needed. We need to absolutely transform the way we work. This is one example of that. The NatureServe's conservation status ranks are measures of extinction risk that we assign to individual species, are used by government agencies, they're used by corporations doing sustainability reporting, they're used by academic researchers and others taking conservation action. Because of the rapid pace of change, we have a goal of updating these ranks every 10 years. And we're absolutely failing at this. If you look at these statistics, over 70% of our ranks are out of date. This matters. These ranks help direct millions of dollars in conservation investments. And when they're wrong, that money's being misguided. If we can't provide answers to those three questions, the resources that are being diverted into stemming biodiversity loss are really not going to have the impact they could. Our problem with conservation statuses is echoed by the IUCN Red List. Globally, of those 10 million species, 2 million are described. Only 150,000 have even been assigned a conservation status rank. We're in our own burning earth moment, and just as the Cuyahoga River fire got people in a room, led to formation of the NatureServe network, I see this moment, and particularly this workshop, as the opportunity to figure out how the technology of today can meet the needs of this crisis. So thinking about those three questions, what is it? I see possibilities for AI, and particularly things like natural language processing, to help us link data from data collections in the scientific literature to the named elements of biodiversity that communities use and understand and manage for. In terms of where is it, there's great opportunities with Earth observation and machine learning methods to better map biodiversity, and I'll end with an example of that. For how it's doing, those conservation ranks I spoke about, we absolutely can keep those up to date with the right kind of technology. And there's some really interesting methods that are being piloted now in different places. The thing I'm perhaps most excited about, though, is the ability of AI to make all this information accessible and understandable to the people who are doing conservation work on the ground. I have this kind of crazy vision of the spatially enabled chat and map GPT for nature that would allow a land manager in Florida or the Yukon or Tanzania to pull together the information they need for the decisions they're trying to make. I also think that if we can do this, that if we repeat that survey in 2030 of capacity for tracking sustainability targets, we could have 92% of respondents saying they do have the tools and capacity they need. I said I'd end with a quick story. This is a map of areas of importance for at-risk species that NatureServe produced in 2013 based on information collected from our network. It's pretty cool looking, but it's really coarse and not particularly actionable. More recently, we took that data and we used machine learning. We combined it with the expertise of our network and new AI techniques to create habitat models for all of the nation's most endangered species, stack those up, and identify at fine scales where conservation is needed most, working with Esri and Microsoft on this. And this really has had an impact. You can see what it looks like zoomed in here in Arkansas, but it's having an impact in, since we released this map, we've seen it used for 30 by 30 planning in the US. We've seen it used by the Bureau of Land Management to balance resource extraction and species protection needs. And we've seen it used by corporations in their sustainability reporting. That list kind of goes on and on. With this map, I've seen what's possible when we get biologists and conservationists and technologists in a room to look at the opportunities we have with today's technology and how we can address these pressing problems. And I'm really excited to do more of that with all of you over the next 2 days.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If anybody wants to see this, I've got it.
That's one question, and then I'm going to.
I take your fourth and I raise you a fifth. What can we do? Because if I think about starting from the Parks and Recreation Department of the City of San Francisco to your decision maker in Yukon or in Tanzania, they're asking, where can we start? And we don't have time to figure out and reinvent the wheel. So actually figuring out what are the interventions that work and what are the interventions that don't work, taking into consideration, of course, the very local context of some of those interventions is another thing, I think, another aspect where we can start marrying the interventions with the impact and start asking what works.
So I absolutely agree with that. And we actually have a version of that slide with 5 questions. And the last one is, what can we do? And that gets to what I was saying about making that information decipherable, making it so that people can actually figure out what does this all mean. Biodiversity is so complex, but what people need is to know how to act in their park or their particular place. So how do we take that huge complexity and boil it down to something that somebody can take action on? And it's hard to answer, but eager to do so.
Amazing. Thank you so much.